Hello, we should be live right now, here in my photo studio, bringing to you another episode of Techniques. Right here in the room there are a couple of cameras. You will see we have different angles, and Tom, master operator of the camera, is right over there. So together here we are bringing you an episode of how to handle your camera as a beginner, especially about the technical side of the camera. In other words, what can you do with it? So I'm going to the slide right here. I have slides prepared for you. As you are able to see this later on, we might go a little fast, but when you look back at this video, you can stop at any moment and try to figure things out with your own camera. I'm just giving you a general idea to get you accustomed with what we call manual settings in your camera. Manual is actually where the fun begins. Okay, here we go. So we start with camera techniques, and which is another word or other saying of control over your exposure and over your image. So I see it as tools to play. So the way to get to know that is to discover the camera. It took me a long time before I used those settings when I was younger, because they're very intimidating. You have no idea what's going on, and you have no idea why or how. So you put everything on the auto mode, the automatic mode. So this is an image from Google, and you see all these settings, and it confuses you because it's not easy to explain. You don't explain it in 2 seconds or in half a minute. So I'm going to try to tell you in this 40 minutes what you can do with it, and then it's a matter for you to play with it. So you have all kind of settings, and in the next slide here, now we have digital cameras with the screen, and the screen tells us more or less the same what's going on in the camera, what the situation is with the camera. Every camera is kind of the same. The Nikon, the Canon, the Olympus, it doesn't matter so much. They all have settings from automatic or program, it's kind of the same. Then you have the manual, that's completely in control by you. And then you have aperture settings and f-stop settings and ISO settings. So we go through it, stay with me. The first thing I'm going to start is the shutter speed. Shutter speed is the way that it used to be in the camera, that the slide in the door in the camera and expose the film is like choop, quickly open and close. Nowadays the system is a bit different, but the principle is the same. It's how long is your film or your digital bag exposed. So shutter speed. And that means it can go fast and it can go slow, of course. I give you 2 examples, and these are images you have to pay attention to, because it will be your reference in your mind. So this is of a gentleman called Nick, and he is a long distance runner. I wanted to photograph him in the area where he loves to run, which is Georgian Bay and along the Bruce Trail. He's a fast runner. But I can photograph him in 2 ways. Either that you see a lot of drag, see him moving, or in this image I did it crystal clear, very sharp. So I can make him sharp because I have enough light, but also because my shutter speed is 1/2000th of a second. That's very fast. 1/2000th of a second. So the next image is kind of the opposite. This is shot at a bike race here in the Blue Mountains, This photo is shot in 1/80th of a second. So that's kind of slow. And I moved with the camera, so you see movement in the image, in the final image. So I'm going back to the previous image. This is really crisp, and if you look at photos in nowadays on internet, sports photos, if they're hanging mid-air, they're jumping or they're biking or they, you know, if you can get them really crisp and you see their face, it's beautiful. But it's also beautiful to have the choice to see movement in the image. So I'm going further here. So shutter speed is the speed of the shutter mechanism that allows the film, which is now mostly the sensor, to be exposed to the light. And you understand, if it goes very slowly, there's a lot of light, and if it goes like very quick, then there's less light. It moves often quickly to not overexpose your film or your sensor. It can open and close from 1/8000th of a second to, for example, 60 minutes opening. So if you do, for example, a shot in the middle of the night and you want to see all these red stripes and yellow stripes of cars through a city, you can open it for a minute or 2 or 3, or when you do the stars, you do it for a minute, because you need a lot of light coming in. But if you cannot do 60 minutes for a sports shot, because then you won't see anything. Everything is blurred. So, two extremes, you have a choice to do that. Standard shutter speeds are in seconds. So when you hear 1/15th of a second, it's obviously that short. So you can go from 1 second, 1/15th of a second, 1/30, 1/60, 1/120th, 1/250, etc. It's building up every time. 30, 60, 120, 250, 500. You might want to remember that. Exceptional is 1/8000th of a second, which is a very quick shutter. But if you have like a Nikon D5 or, you know, cameras that they use for Olympic sports, they have a really fast shutter speed. Okay. So what do we do with shutter speed? We use it for movement or to help to freeze the image. So whenever you're going to make an image, and for example you do your kid playing or sports or whatever, something in the street photography, you have to decide, do I want to have it like crisp, very frozen in the moment, or do I want to have it like a little blurred? It all depends on what you want to do. So that's a very basic question. When you go on manual, you are considering this. So I'm grabbing my camera here. Now for example, in this Olympus camera, I have a wheel here. And this wheel shows different setting. Mine is now set to manual. That means I'm totally in control. But you can also put it on, for example, get the lock off, on S. That means that you have the priority to shutter speed. So whatever you change on your dial mode, it's about shutter speed, how to handle your shutter speed. The next one is Aperture Mode, which means whatever you dial on the other dials, rings here, you play with aperture. Now I will come back to that. So you have to consider, what setting do I want? Do I want to get in completely, or do I want to go in steps? Well, I'll continue. Here we go. We go back to the slide. So I have a little clip here. You see. Let's see if this works here. So I click on this one, and then you hear a slow shutter speed. Right, that's pretty slow. Then we take this one. Okay, we take this one. Oh, that's a slow one. That's a real slow one. And this one. So this last one was a continuous shooting. It's just an example to give you that you can put, when you change your shutter speed to 1/30 of a second, or to 1/80 of a second, or 1,000 of a second, it makes a different sound. And if you do sports mode, for example, you can put them on continuous shooting. I will come back to that later. And then it goes like, it keeps on, the motor keeps on driving, kind of. So when you try in your own camera, it's good to hear the different sounds, because sometimes when you're busy with photographing, you forgot to change your dial mode, and you hear like, oh, that's way too slow, and then you change it. So the sound is also helpful. This one is from my bigger camera, my Pentax camera, and makes it a huge sound. It's a mirror that goes up and down. This little camera, if you can see it, this little camera doesn't have a mirror. It's a mirrorless camera. So it's different. The Pentax that I'm just showing you here on the screen is an old-fashioned, kind of old-fashioned mirror camera. The mirror switches up, then it opens up for the light, and then it closes again. Mirrorless is just avoiding that whole system. It all has to do with the sensor. Okay, another example on my screen here. Just for the fun of it, how there was a parking full of seagulls, and I wanted to see when they fly away, what kind of movement they had. So I did it like a shutter speed of 1/13 of a second. So it's quite slow. And you see, it's all a movement in there, which I kind of like it. Okay, we go to the next one. Yeah, that's me. And this is also, I'm having the camera in my hand and I'm turning like crazy. So you kind of see me sharp and the rest is foggy. Very playful. There we go. And these shots are made of a sports event in Blue Mountain. You see, all of them are crisp. So here you see the biker just making a turn, and he's sharp. He's crisp sharp. You see even his eyes and everything is sharp. The skier in the right upper corner is super sharp. And that's how I wanted it. And because it's super sharp, if you would see this picture in large format, you could see the eyes and the focus of the sports lady. And then the other one is the bike in the air. So it's all done in purpose. I wanted to have these moments like a short, like 1,000, 2,000 of a second, and make sure that I see everything what happens in that moment. And that's the beauty of photography. You can play with time. You can stop time, and that tiny moment that you don't see with your eyes normally, like somebody jumping, a car high up the air, horses running, you don't see what's happening with your eyes, but with photo you can freeze it. And that's absolutely amazing. Okay, so here's another image to show you what can be done if you have a very slow shutter speed. Like I have it open for, what was it? Maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds. A couple of kids all had a torch with the color, and then they wrote down a word. But you see, it takes a while. So that's all has to do with shutter speed. It's a tool you can play with. So, basic sentence, with shutter speed you can play with motion. That's actually the basic. You play with motion. Okay, so I say in this slide, please pause here and do an exercise shown in the next slide. I'm going to show you this, but do this at home when you review this video, because I want to continue here. So if you can get the good shot of this screen, Mr. Cameraman. So take your camera, look for the main dial, so that's the dial that says manual or aperture, A for aperture program. So put it on M and find then the other wheel on your camera that changes the shutter speed. So can we have a quick look on this camera? So here, is this sharp enough? Here we have like 25 hundredths of a second, right? That's right here. So I'm changing the dial here. This one here. 64 hundredths of a second. That's really fast. So I can go all the way to like 200, 125. So there's one dial that changes all the shutter speed. And that's where you have to play with. Okay, we go back to the slide. You look through the viewfinder and you look and you see if you can change or dial the button. See the numbers, see the steps, and sometimes you feel the clicks, and see if you can dial and make a good exposure. So you make a photo and you see what kind of shutter speed it is. Then you change the dial to a higher shutter speed and you make another photo. And again, and again, and again, until you have had like maybe 10 different shutter speeds. And you will see the difference. So that gives you a bit of control. We move on. You see here, this slide, it tells you about this is the manual, this is the shutter speed, aperture, and this is the program. And you have a bunch of other things that are not necessary right now. And then here with my finger I can change, and Canon and Nikon and Sony all have similar things. It's just look for it on your camera and you will notice. These are the dials that you use to change different things. So I use this one just right now with my thumb, and you can see then on your screen or in your viewfinder. And if you're lucky and you have an electronic viewfinder, you have an even clearer image. You see that's 500th of a second. Okay, we go further. Okay, so you can change the dial. Oh, that's good to say. So you can also see there's always a meter that has a minus and a plus in your viewfinder or on your screen or on any other little screen built into the camera. And it says 0 in the middle. So that's where the exposure, the light exposure, is kind of correct. And then you can go overexposure, you put it in the plus, or underexposure in the minus. Now that's not wrong, because you can play with it. Maybe you like to underexpose it for a reason. But at least you have something to hold on to. The 0 in the middle tells you your image is even exposed. Okay, we go to the next one. I hope you guys can follow me. You can watch this video later on, so it's a lot to cope with, but you will get there, and we will answer questions if you want later on. So the next one is ISO, and ISO is also a tool that you can play with. 2 examples. Now this example is on the camera maybe not 100% clear, but basically I made a photo here in the basement. This is photo 2 and this is photo 1. And this is ISO 200. So that's ISO says it's like the sensitivity of the film in the old days, but now it's the sensitivity in the sensor. And if you have like 3200 ISO, it's very sensitive. So you might want to use it, for example, when it's darker, dusk or dawn, or maybe in a darker room, or in a sports center, whatever. It helps you to make sure that you expose your image well. But it comes with an issue. They're getting better at it, the cameras of today, but the higher the ISO, the more, you call that, what do you call it again?
Noise?
Noise, yeah, that's the word, sorry about that. No, it's called noise. So that means it's not a clear image, but it has like little digital noise in it. So in this image you see, for example, by the fireplace, you see there's a lot of coloring in different mix, and you have it less here. You have a lot of noise here, but you won't have it here. So a lower ISO is a crisper, clearer image, but is also accepting less light. So we go to the next one. A sensitivity to the light, that's what ISO means. A low ISO does not allow much light into the sensor. A high ISO, starting from 1600 at this moment, allows a lot of light into each sensor. So this is another image. It's not completely sharp, but for example, it says here ISO. You can have 1200, 1000, 800. So I have an image here. I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera. It was all the same. The only thing I changed was the ISO. So you have 100 ISO, which is a dark image. 200 gets a little bit better. 400 better. 800 even better. 1600 you have completely clear Mr. Darth Vader here. So I changed my ISO from 100 to 1600, but it comes with an image quality. Now these days it can also be artistic to play with a very noisy, because it gives a kind of a mood. But you have to understand that if you use more ISO, a higher ISO amount, you get more noise. A lower ISO amount is darker but also crisper. The numbers range from 100 to 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400. And the cameras today go up, way up. And they're getting better at it in low light situations. So the numbers double up, and that's something you can remember. Okay. So fewer noise. ISO is fewer noise. Higher ISO gives more noise, and you see that a lot in the shadow areas, in the darker areas. A lot of noise can lower the quality of your photo, but on the other hand, if you play with it and it is artistically reasonable, then why not? Today the race for the highest quality in ISO is still on, and it gives you an extra tool. So it might be that like next year you buy a camera and 1600 is not high, it's like 128,000 or something, really. So here's, you see it a little bit more. In the top picture you have less ISO, and in the lower picture here you have more ISO. There's more noise. And sometimes it can be really ugly if it's too much. So that's a part that you have to consider in manual photography. Okay, so when I do, for example, make photos of the sky, I open my ISO a lot, 1600, 3200, because I need help to get as much light in as possible. All right, so I'm stopping with the ISO. The only thing I want to say is that you don't see as much annoying ISO noise in black and white, because the noise exists of colors and a little bit of contrast. So if you change your noisy color photo into black and white in your photo program, it's less annoying. It might be artistic. Okay, so this is also a playing moment. You take your camera, you put it on manual, and then you look for the ISO. And that's different for every camera. And then you make photos. Lower ISO, a little bit more. Until you find out and really see for yourself the result. Alright? This is another picture, low ISO, and then you can go all the way up to 1600. And again, same as for the shutter speed, you see on the meter reading, you know, with the 0 and the minus and the plus, you can see if your ISO is, you can use your ISO to make sure you have your image well exposed. Okay. So, and the last part is called aperture. And aperture is, it consists of something which is in the lens. So, here we go. So this is an image I took in the mountains, of course, you see that. But I wanted to see the whole stretch of mountains. So not only one peak or one rock in front of me, I just wanted to have the whole landscape kind of sharp. So I used a certain f-stop or aperture setting that would allow sharpness of the whole image. So it's well done, because you can see all the way from the beginning, the rocks, all the way to the back, including the clouds, that it's sharp. Now the opposite of that kind of use is this one. This is a photo made by Peter Stranks, Ontario photographer and my old teacher. And he was in a big crowd in the United States, and he was looking for Canadians, and he had this special lens with, I think, a very narrow f-stop, and he just made this beautiful photo. So what you see is only her face, her eyes, and already by the hair it starts fading away. And it's a beautiful effect, and especially for photography, it's amazing to see how you can have one thing in focus and the rest is not really important, because it's all about these eyes or this animal or you know, this particular thing or an insect even. So it's one of the things that I like very much from aperture or f-stops. So an aperture is an opening mechanism in the lens, and the F stands for focal plus ratio. Well, you can forget that for now. Like 5.6 or 2.8, and often when you look for camera lenses, they mention like it's a 2.8 lens or a 4 point whatever, right? So a narrow opening on most common lenses is f22. That means the lens is really narrow, and a wide open f-stop is like 2.8 or even 1.4. That means it's really open. And when it's really open, and we go back to the image, then we have an image like this. If you do, for example, only the eyes. And if you would have a very narrow opening, like an f22, you would have like this image. Okay, so it's a great tool to play with. It really gives a lot of fun. So here's a few examples of f-stops. f22 in this corner, in the left upper corner, very narrow, and it goes to, for example, f16, f11, f8, 5.6, 2.8, or even 1.4. It's probably one of the things that you would use most when you do photography, because it has something to do with focus on that thing that you find important, on your subject, on that person, on that flower or whatever. And it focuses on that specific thing and leaves the rest partly or completely unimportant. Okay, so The aperture numbers can be for 1.4, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22. These are sequential numbers. I'm not going into why are they called so much, that's a whole lot of story. It's just remember it. More exceptional is F1, that's really very open wide, and you can have F44 and F64, and F64 is like a total small little hole. Probably you don't have a lens that has that, unless you have a very special camera. Okay, so what does Aperture do? It handles being in focus. So if the camera, this camera won't have me in focus, then it puts sharp on my eyes. If it would come closer and it would have like f2.8, the rest of the background would be blurry. It can help to separate the subject from its environment. Or it can include the whole environment in the photo. If you would do like, for example, street photography, maybe you want to see the whole city and that particular person, because you want to see it in an environment, right? We call it depth of field. So a little bit depth of field, a little bit, or a lot of depth of field. A lot is sharp, a little bit sharp, or a lot sharp. It's about your choice of what you do with your camera. I hope you can see this in this picture. This is about the cat. So it's about the sunset, and then you have the cat. But all the hairs are in the photo are sharp. I hope you can see it, but I wanted to see all these little hairs from afar. For example, here there's not much depth of field in this apple pie. It's only this area that is sharp, and the rest is just for ambience, kind of. That's all what you do with the f-stops and aperture. This, for example, is a landscape from the gate in the beginning to the gate all the way in the back. It's all sharp. It's all sharp. So you, as the photographer, you decide what is important in my image. What do I want to tell? Is it only a person? Is it only a flower? Or is it the whole landscape? Another image, this is the whole landscape. Everything is sharp. Okay, so again, I invite you later on when you review this video to play with it. Try to find the aperture, and it can be, if you can change to this camera, it can be that the aperture is right here, if it's not an automatic one, so you dial it here, or when you switch on the camera, there we go, you can see it in your screen right here. Now it's on f.4, I changed it 3.5, 6.3, f16, and it makes different photos. So wholeheartedly invited to play with that. And again, try them on all different aperture settings and see what a difference make. Same image, but different settings. Okay. Again, you will see it in your screen or in the little display on the camera itself. Okay. And again, it will tell you in your screen, is it overexposed or is it underexposed? But when you do the testing, don't worry about that too much, because you need to see how it works first. Play with it first. Okay. How are we time-wise? 5?
Yeah.
5? Okay. So, it's all a lot. And it took me weeks to get all this information understandable. The best is if you take one thing and play with it for a while. until you're done with it and say, oh yeah, I get that. And then you take the next one and then you play with it. Don't try to do a wedding shoot and say like, oh, I can do that straight away, and then, because you're gonna go crazy. Manual is complicated. Because basically what you do, and I'm going to show you this slide, you have aperture, you have shutter speed, and you have ISO. If you want to have a correct exposure, and most of the time you really want to have a correct exposure, you got to have a balance between them. So if you would have like for example, 33, 33, and 33%, just to give a number. But if you change one, you either have to change the other one too, but in the opposite direction. It's all about balance. So instead of plus and minus, you say, okay, this one goes more in the minus, then my other one goes in the plus. You have to see it as a triangle. You have to compensate with each other. So for example, if you do a sports picture, you want to have a lot of light, but you want to have a very, very fast shutter speed, which is not a lot of light coming into your camera. And then you say, okay, well, I'm going to put the ISO a little higher, so it gives me room, it gives me a little slack to play with. So when you choose, for example, a runner, make sure you have a fast shutter speed, 1/2000 for example, and then you compensate with the other one until you have a right exposure. And then you look back to your camera and see that it's kind of, is it in zero, is it a little bit in minus, a little bit in plus. A little bit doesn't matter, change, because you can always change that in your later in your MacBook or in your software program. But at least you've got to be in the ballpark. So it's all about balance, and that's why you have to play with it, because you got to know that if you do one step, you have to take another step to compensate for it. So it's a delicate playing game. I shoot mostly on manual, and I always, like, in my mind and in the way I photograph, is always like, oh, this is all quick, and I just adjust it and click then. But you can also choose to have, like, for example, I only want to work with the aperture, and then you put it on A, or which is what is it called? Here it's called A, Aperture Mode, and here is it called TV, I think. Then you only play with the aperture, and the camera does the rest automatic. So the camera automatic program will compensate for it. If you want to play with shutter speed only, then the camera will compensate for the right light, and you play with your shutter speed. So dare to explore it, dare to play with it, dare to change the dials. If it doesn't work and you feel uncomfortable, you can always put it back on either P, program, or A is automatic mode. And then you're back safe again, and you can make photos and until you have the courage to step into that area again. So let me see if I have one more thing. Yeah. So this one is, for example, is a high shutter speed image, and then later on I changed it in software program. I lighted up the shadows a little bit and then finalized. But the most important thing was I needed to see that skier on the water, like frozen in a moment. So what you do with your camera, it's not, you always have a bit of a room to play with. So I'm coming back. We have three different things. We have aperture, we have shutter speed, and we have ISO. Three tools to play with. It's called manual setting. You are in control, not the camera, which means you can do a heck of a lot more with your camera, and you are the one who decides how your image is going to be. If you're a beginner, play with it. Just play with it and get to know your camera. Just dare to step into that complicated part of the camera and make it your own. So this is a photo of my dog in the Blue Mountain on automatic settings. So the camera does the work. What does the camera do? It makes sure that there's enough light. It compensates for everything. But the image is so-so. So here it is like I wanted it. Now I see beautiful misty background. I see the silhouette of my dog. I see the sun. So this is manual setting. This is my choice. And here I go back to automatic settings. And with these two pictures, I want to end this session. It really makes a lot of sense if you are in control and you determine how you want it. It's very personal, and every situation is different. So if you're able to use that camera and start exploring, that's really great. And I think, Tom, that if you guys have any other questions per email or whatever, you can definitely send it and I will give you an answer. I think we're at the end of the session. It's a lot, but it takes a little while before you get the feel for it. But when you do, you will have a lot of fun with it. Then you come into real photography. Thank you very much for your attention and hope to have another session soon. Cheers.